Welcome back to another episode of Leaders and Founders. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Lee Provoost, CTO of Flagstone. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here.
No worries at all. I guess just to kick us off, do you want to give us a bit of a brief run through of yourself and what it is Flagstone do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CTO of Flagstone. Joined a bit over 3 years ago. And Flagstone, fintech based in actually not that far from here, in center of London. Very UK focused, and we're a cash savings platform. So what that means is that clients can create one login and then they have access to savings products from 70 different banks. So you don't need to worry about contacting them, signing up. We manage all that complexity for you. And that means that, if you sell a house, you have a lot of cash that you want to protect and get maximum interest, then you can ask us to spread that across different banks for you.
Awesome. And I guess to do a bit of a delve into yourself, your background, you've done public sector across different government departments, health tech, and now financial services. What is it about the regulated industries that draws you in?
I would love to claim that it was a very well planned career. It was pure coincidence that I joined a pharmaceutical company many years ago, and that's how I kind of accidentally landed in a more kind of regulated environment, and then moving on to government with some kind of high security systems, health tech, fintech. And one of the things I quite like is that there are certain constraints, but I often find that constraints often kind of breed creativity. I don't know, part of me feels that some of the things that we have to do to protect client data, client money, are probably things that most companies should do anyway. I think, sometimes I'm quite horrified when I see the cavalier attitude towards data and sensitive data and client data from consumer tech businesses. And I think there's probably more that can be done. But yeah, that's the thing that attracted me, is like the constraints breed creativity.
What is it about those constraints? Do you think it is just that there's almost set rules that you have to play in, so you can't just go completely wild with what you do?
There is a bit of that, but I think people are worried that I don't want to work in a regulated industry or finance or fintech, because I'm not allowed to do all of the things that I'm used to. Especially engineers, very worried about I can't do anything on my computer, laptop type of things. But what you actually find is that most regulatory bodies that provide oversight aren't that prescriptive, right? They're not telling you, here is a checklist of 200 things where one of those items is your laptop needs to be XYZ, or you need to have this type of web application firewall with these configurations. It is very much around, these are the risks, these are the things that we want you to think about, and so that we protect the financial system in the UK. We protect client money. We avoid panic because your website is down, or people worried about, is my money safe? And then as a business, you need to think through, these are the type of risks, how willing are we to accept some of those risks versus investment versus opportunities. And then it is up to the teams, my teams, to think about, well, what is the best response to that? And I think one of the exciting things when you work in a kind of more modern fintech versus maybe working for a very well-established 200-year-old financial institution is you don't have the same level of baggage and the same level of established process and control. And that means that you can sometimes come up with some really creative, interesting solutions to some of those problems and constraints that are imposed on you.
And do you think that those very well established older financial services businesses, that's kind of what causes that? There's the belief that within regulated industries you can't innovate and you can't be as creative. Do you think that comes from maybe those older, more complex businesses where it probably is harder to do that?
Yeah, I think it's good to appreciate that a lot of the kind of more established, bigger organizations in financial services industry also have a lot more responsibility, right? If you are a high street bank, then you have quite a big role to play in the stability of a country, right? Most fintechs don't have that. Now, of course, with Flagstone growing, we're like crossing the 17, 18 billion pound in assets we administer for clients, we're starting to kind of feel some of that responsibility as well. Right? If you manage maybe a couple of 100 million, then you don't feel it that way. So the bigger you become, the more risk averse you also become, because there's actually quite a lot at stake. So I do understand why bigger organizations, more established organizations, tend to be quite risk averse because of the responsibilities. But equally, there is, of course, often a culture that has been growing over decades and decades. And I think it's fair to say that sometimes that culture can and should be challenged. And it's always easier when you land in a smaller fintech, smaller tech company with less legacy, less established process and control to innovate, because there's less to dictate what you can and can't do. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess that leads on quite nicely to what was it that drew you to Flagstone? Why did you want to join?
I always joke about is that I actually didn't want to work for Flagstone because I worked for a fintech clearing bank, and I was I was head of engineering for the UK payment system. So it was kind of high traffic, critical 24/7 payment systems, and I was looking for something similar, of similar complexity, also fintech. And I was approached for this role, and my initial response was, how difficult can it be to set up a WordPress website with a couple of savings products? Now, that completely shows my complete lack of understanding of that business and the industry.
But didn't say that in the interview, did you?
No, I did say it afterwards, after I got the job. And so luckily, the people I was talking to, they were like, well, look, we have this relationship already go for a good few years, and you will like the team, you will like the company. Why don't you speak to them? And I did. And yeah, 4 years later, I'm sitting here as CTO of the business. And I've learned that actually, because there isn't a cash savings platform product you can buy off the shelf, like if you want to build a neobank, there are quite a few players in the market where you can go to and say, give me the building blocks to build my own bank. That doesn't exist for what we do. So that means that pretty much everything we have and do is proprietary and in-house built. And a lot of the solutions marketed to fintech businesses um, either don't exist for what we need, or don't actually fully deliver on what we need, which means that a lot of it is in-house and we have to come up with things ourselves. So having the creativity to come up with novel solutions under the constraints of what we talked about, of some of the regulatory oversight, is what I find quite exciting.
Yeah, and bringing together, you mentioned over 70 different banks,
Yeah,
or savings accounts. Like, that's a lot to bring together. I know you mentioned there about how hard is it to have a WordPress site with offer savings on, but it sounds like a very complex process to be able to offer that well to consumers. Well, what would you say some of the toughest challenges are?
yeah. So it's 70 banks, and probably I would say anywhere between 350 different savings products. I think the biggest challenge that I find is the thing I've just mentioned around nothing comes off the shelf. It is one big challenge, but trying to do that at scale is the other challenge. So for instance, bank holiday weekends, always, people enjoy celebrating, go having a pint with friends and family. But bank holiday weekends are surprisingly quite busy for us. as in the day after the bank holiday, because then there's an accumulation of instructions from clients because people, instruct us move money, deposit, withdraw, etc. And so we can, on days after bank holiday, we can process 1.5 million instructions on a day. And so that causes some very interesting challenges, that you have those very, very big spikes on certain times throughout the year that you need to deal with. So yeah, I think the scale, the complexity, the fact that every bank is slightly different, has slightly different needs. So luckily, because Flagstone is one of the leading players in the market and we're bigger now and more well established, we have a bit more negotiation power versus, when we started 10 years ago, we pretty much had to do whatever banks were asking us. Now we are in a slightly stronger position, pushing back on, yes, we can do that, no, we can't do that, in order to protect the simplicity and integrity of the platform. So yeah, I think that would be probably one of our bigger challenges.
Yeah. And you mentioned there about the simplicity of the platform. Obviously, it's quite a complex offering, but delivered with very simplistic UX and customer
Yeah.
experience. How do you manage what are kind of polarizing views?
The complexity of what we do is because we have corporate clients, small and larger. We have charities. We have individual clients with individual accounts. We have then joint accounts. Those are direct to consumer, but they also are through wealth managers. And then we also have clients who use Flagstone through other fintechs, but may not even be aware that they're using Flagstone in the background. That complexity of all those different types of client types means that trying to offer what looks a very simple interface is not easy. And I think the reason why it's one of the things we often get as a compliment is it's very simple, it's very easy, but that's a deliberate design decision. So when I worked at Government Digital Service, one of the big mantras was, do the hard work to make things simple for the user. And so whilst it looks like how difficult can it be to have maybe 4 or 5 different pages in a client app when you log in, there is a lot of kind of complexity around optimizing tax statements for all those different type of clients, or very invisible things like speeding up processing your payment that has a substantial positive kind of impact on the client, but it's not visible, but you do feel it because you will get your interest quicker. These are things like that. So yeah, it's a very deliberate decision, and it is a constant battle for making the right priority calls. We do a lot of user research, a lot of testing, a lot of validation, because the worst thing we can do is just add more and more capabilities. It becomes bloated, people don't understand, and then of course the consequence is then people start calling us, I don't understand how to use your platform or system.
Yeah, I saw there was a post today on LinkedIn by Lady Gliptis.
Yeah.
And did you see it this morning? It was about always focusing on adding value to the customer, not focusing on short-term revenue, but looking at it long-term and making sure customers are happy with what they can pick from you. I guess that's very similar to what you're saying there, of just make simple offerings that customers can understand and they know what they're getting, not trying to think short-term, oh, well, we can tie them in with more if we
Yep.
bundle it like this, but actually making it very easy for customers.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you've seen that from Leda, because she was a non-executive board director of Flagstone
Yeah.
in the earlier days of the company. So I'm pretty certain that some of that thinking was really kind of also infused in the business because of her involvement as well. So yeah, it's sometimes great to see like the impact that certain people in our financial services industry can make. Like for instance, one of our current board directors is Mary Williams, the former CT of Monzo and the CT of Pleo, and the insights and the experience that they bring to the table around things like resiliency for a bank, which is quite relevant now with all the issues around cloud providers, things around focusing on consumer duty, right? Doing the right thing and treating customers fairly, those type of things. Just it again, having people like Leda and people like Mary on board kind of highlighted for me the importance of having those type of people surrounding your business and giving the right insights and advice.
And then just side note to that, do you think your sort of government time helped with that as well? Because obviously within government you have to comply with GDS standards when you're building services. Do you think that mindset helps you be successful now when you're building, trying to make simple solutions for people?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I still regularly reread and the service standards from the government digital service, and usually point my teams to it as well, because for many companies they could pretty much copy paste that whole thing with a few adjustments. A lot of the principles are very valid, and for me, that one around doing the hard work to make things simple is like one of my big mantras for my team as well. So yeah, it has definitely influenced me, especially then also then the work I've done with the UK Passport Office, leading the design and build of the online passport renewal platform, which was where we were obsessed about user testing and not make any assumptions about how quote unquote easy it is. Right? It may sound very obvious for maybe you and I to take a picture with our phone and upload that to the online platform, but it's surprisingly not as easy as sometimes you think. Like when you have, because one of the learnings was back then, because I'm talking about pre-COVID, a lot of people kind of treated the whole action of renewing a passport as a serious activity, right? And serious activities are done on a desktop computer, not on just your mobile phone, even though doing it on the mobile phone was probably far easier and simpler than doing it on the desktop. So when you do it on the desktop, then of course, how are you going to get your mobile phone photo onto your desktop computer? Right now, of course, I would just email it to myself, got it. But that's not as straightforward as you think it is, right? So a lot of those type of challenging bias and challenging assumptions, and I think, and I really have the empathy hat on, is definitely something that I've picked up and learned working on government services. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I think my dad would probably be your worst nightmare of a customer because he's only just started to trust online banking,
Yeah.
let alone trying to do something on a phone. So
Yeah.
when you're thinking of how your service works, you have to think of the entire population, right? Not just generic people or a certain section of society. It's how it's going to work for everybody.
Yeah. And I think it again, it is so easy to make assumptions and fall into certain biases that you may have. Because, for instance, like when you look at our target market, right, which is obviously people who have cash, I think from memory, it's like 85% of cash is held by 55 plus, which is understandable because it's people who've been saving their lives. They got pensions, cash ISAs. They got, usually build up cash over their lifetime. And then it is very easy to make statements like, well, older people will struggle with this. But it's like, well, if I look at some of the grandparents that I know, or uncles and aunts, they all are pretty savvy with their iPad, and and that's the thing, is that kind of bias and built-in assumptions about, well, older people will struggle with this is quite often not true. They may struggle with other things, and that's one of the challenges for us as well, is trying to build a product, which is why it is so simple by design. It is kind of catering to quite a wider variety of digital literacy.
How do you prevent those biases coming in that you mentioned? Because a lot of the time it's not deliberate; it's subconscious.
It is a lot of user testing, validation with users. We've got a fantastic team that developed a whole bunch of different personas reflecting needs of users, reflecting, age, etc. And we then deliberately also seek out particular groups of people where we believe, rightfully or wrongly, that they may struggle or not, and then actually get that feedback. So that's that. Also, we do quite a lot of surveys to get real feedback from clients. So, for instance, when they instruct us to move money from bank A to bank B, there can sometimes be like a pop-up asking, how was that experience? Can you give us feedback? And then, of course, challenging each other. Like when I hear someone in a meeting making certain assumptions about certain groups of people, age categories, etc., remind them, like, be careful with that assumption.
And then I know we've spoken briefly before about what the focus has been for the last year, and it's
Yeah.
while a lot of people are focusing on the shiny new stuff, you've kind of gone the other way and looked at getting the foundations and fundamentals in place. What's that look like for you?
A lot of companies are obviously all on the AI hype train right now, and I think for me the big realization was this year is a year of growth for the business when it comes to headcount. So we deliberately made a conscious decision to grow a third headcount by a third for 300 to 400 people, and that comes with a lot of interesting challenges and stress, right? All your teams constantly go from that kind of forming and storming and norming, but never get to the performing, because by the time they're slowly getting, the team dynamics sorted, there's a new colleague joining, which then completely resets the dynamic. So that's obviously quite a big thing that is going on this year and that we've been working on. But then there's a lot of, when you go through big times of growth, then most high growth businesses tend to then neglect dealing with some of the foundations, sorting foundational issues, things like do you have the right organizational structure with code base owners, right? When you move teams around, reconfigure teams, you often then have to deal with teams that own systems that may or may not align with their area of expertise or ownership. You then have things like issues with release pipelines, with testing, test suites. There are so many basics that companies tend to forget, that if you actually would get your house in order, a lot of companies could easily get 20-30% productivity boost without even touching AI or GitHub Copilot or any of those products. And so for me, this year was very much a conscious decision to embrace AI, but more from a very cautious, let's experiment, let's trial. We've got a couple of teams trying it out, get the initial feedback. But I deliberately said 2025 is not the year of AI for Flagstone. It is really around focus on the foundations, the fundamentals, and that sets us up for success in 2026 to go a bit more aggressive into adopting AI tools, looking into how it can benefit our business, our clients, etc.
When it comes to AI, I know a lot of people at the moment are focused on how they can establish ROI from what they're
Yeah.
going to implement. Did you look at anything specific around the work you've done this year, which is potentially, let's call it the less sexy work? Was there anything that you said, right, this is what we're looking for when it comes to ROI from that work?
Yeah, I mean, luckily for the less sexy stuff, it's easier to measure because it's often very basic things. Like, for instance, today I just learned from one of the teams we follow the principle of don't optimize before you really need it. And that means that there are certain areas of our tech stack where it is still very heavily monolith, and one of the teams, well, actually two teams, were struggling with that because they were constantly stepping on each other's toes, and they invested multiple sprints into doing the separation of some of the code bases. And the impact is easy to measure, right? So for instance, it now takes, I think, almost 1/10 of the time for pull requests to go through, because the review time is smaller, They aren't stepping on each other's toes. The right team is focused on reviewing the right things. All of and those things is immediate calculated benefit, not only in their velocity but also in employee happiness. So one of the big statements on the slide that they presented was, it's actually fun to work on this code base. And so that's easy to measure. I think the hard part for this year, and that's why I deliberately didn't tell the teams to obsess about the ROI of all the AI trials, was more focus on doing interesting things and gather use cases and good examples. I have a strong conviction that it will give us value. I just can't give you the exact to the pound ROI calculation, and I still can't. So next year, I'm just finalizing budgets for next year. We're making a big investment in AI tooling, and a lot of it is based on a strong conviction that it will pay off. I've seen lots of artificial models that you can use to calculate productivity of engineering orgs. For me, it's like, I believe it will be useful, and probably by the end of 26, I'll be able to give a back of a napkin type of calculation. You know what, the investment paid off, yes or no? I think at the moment that's probably the best I can do.
Yeah. And just to touch on the hiring point you made before,
Mm.
so 30% growth that's a big number to grow.
Yeah.
Again, how do you land on that as, right, this is the amount we want to grow by headcount wise?
Yeah, it wasn't a arbitrary number of, well, 300 is where we are now. 400 seems like a reasonable number. I think we went through almost 6 months of planning. So our CEO is a former investment banker. So he understands budgets, understands the financial side of running a business very well. And he's also someone that has been building this business for 10, 11 years and has built it to a very, profitable business. And so the mindset of making sure we use our money, spend our money wisely, is something that is instilled on the whole senior leadership team. And of course, we do the same then too, our own teams. So there's nothing that would make him more angry than finding out that someone wasted money. So it is really that philosophy of, like, treat the company's money like it is yours, from the point of view of, well, you're not going to waste your own money either, right? So make the right decisions. And that meant that even though we have the cash to just hire more people, we had to go through a very rigorous process of looking at, these are the bets we are going to make, because he feels very strongly about a lot of these. One of his big things is always, the only thing we know about a plan is that it's wrong, right? So ultimately, what we're talking about is, we have certain senior leaders in the business who have a strong conviction about a bet. We believe that if we invest in X, then this is going to be the return and the impact on the business. And whilst it's not exact science, we spend a lot of time in modeling out impact, modeling out disinvestment, what happens if we have one team versus two teams. So that number of broadly growing from 3 to 400 wasn't an arbitrary number. It was really like lots and lots of different proposals, plans, etc. But when you add X number of teams, then you also need to add X number of managers. You need to add HR support. You need to add internal IT support. So the number of 100 extra isn't just pure engineers or product engineers. There's a lot of surrounding supporting. And of course, that means growing the business means you also need to expect more client contact. You need to get more business development managers. You need all of those things. So that's why it probably took us 6 months to get that broadly right. So we're now at the tail end of 25. I think we got it mostly right. There are a few things that maybe we didn't hit spot on, but yeah, broadly we're on plan, and that's because of a lot of effort last year in the planning.
Yeah, it's good to hear, because we've seen examples of tech companies get hiring very wrong. What do you think was what's made you get to this point but keep the company as it is without sort of diluting the values or beliefs of the company?
So one of the things that I observed when I went through my interview process was the kind of almost obsession about company culture. And at that point, I think it's fair to say that I was slightly skeptical because every company talks about
Everybody's got a
great
great culture.
culture. Every CEO stands on stage about how important it is. And even when I joined, I was like, this was a great experience. I can see they genuinely care. But ultimately, does that translate into how business decisions are being made? And because the CEO is also my line manager, I spend a fair bit of time with him, getting him to know also on a personal level. And so when I got to know him better, there were quite a few things that actually gave me like the insight, oh, this guy is actually quite serious about building the right company culture. And he explained that he has worked in enough environments where that wasn't important, and it was quite dysfunctional and toxic, and he vowed he will never build a company that it doesn't put that at the heart of everything we do. And so what that means is that during our, for instance, mid-year, end-year reviews, we have a set of cultural values and how that, how those behaviors are shine through. It is quite an important part of how people are assessed. So it is, you can be the most gifted, brilliant, most kind of impact making individual. If you don't meet certain standards around what we expect how people to behave, then you would never be, at the top of the review score, as an example. And there's a lot of effort during the hiring process, and that's why a hiring process, we often get the feedback that candidates enjoy it, but sometimes feel it's slightly longer than they would like to, is because there are certain steps in it that very, very specifically look at leadership qualities, your views on how you show up every day as a leader and a manager, the values that are important to you. And so I think when I joined the business, we were with 150 people. We're now close to 400. And whilst companies change with growth, I still think that from a values point of view, we're still the same as when we were 150. And I would actually say we've become stronger at it because we've also become a lot more mature and a lot better at kind of quote unquote enforcing some of the standards and expectations around culture.
And you've touched on it there of there's different things that highlight how people show up and how they act as leaders. But is there anything that you could, I guess, pinpoint and specifically say this is what I look for in people to see whether they would be successful in your opinion during the interview process?
Figuring that out during the interview process is,
Hard.
is always a difficult one. But traits I've seen and that I really value is perseverance. And that's not just Flagstone, it's also in some of the previous businesses I worked for, is the people who can persevere when things become difficult. So, and just because sometimes like driving change, solving a complex problem can sometimes take several months of very ungrateful work that can be quite stressful, a lot of unknowns, a lot of blockers. And um, when I ran a 16-month project to decommission our legacy system, that was a really hard, difficult project. Um, and what that taught me was the people who actually wake up every day and say, we'll give this another go. Those are the people that tend to succeed in high growth tech businesses. And I've seen that in my own business I built many years ago, and seen that in other fintechs I've worked for. that's for me like the biggest trait, more important than the hard technical skill.
Just keep going.
Yeah, just keep going. And I think it's a bit of an underrated kind of a trait and just life in general.
Yeah, I'd
I
agree.
think sometimes it's not the smartest, the best person who succeeds. It's the person who shows up every day and says, "We will get this done."
The only way you can fail is to quit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We've touched on the lovely topic of AI. Where do you see, I know you've mentioned some of it previously, but where do you really see the value, I guess, short, medium, long term? Everybody's kind of looking at it as a silver bullet, which I think is completely wrong, but be interested to hear your take.
So the first stage for us is very much the kind of the co-pilot type of phase, where it is making people who are productive and good at the jobs more productive, right? So with developers, we have already a handful of good examples where some of the engineers pointed GitHub Copilot to one of our internal libraries and say, "Can you tell me where we are missing certain tests?" And it found actually a gap in some of the testing, a very obscure bug. And surprise, surprise, because we only recently just launched a new mobile app, when we were testing the mobile app, that actually triggered that specific code path. And then the tool had already provided us a fix for that bug. So that's really the phase we're in, is how can we make people who are good at their job and productive even more productive. So that's engineers, but that's also product managers, for instance. How can we accelerate our ability to make bets? How can we write even better product specifications? I think we're still a little bit away from it actually replacing humans or human work. I do see a potential risk in the short term with especially people who are more at the junior end of the scale. Like I can see already some AI tools cannibalizing some of the work that could be done by a junior member of staff, which then obviously creates a future disaster where we don't we don't kind of grow the future generation of the future seniors.
And do you think, just to touch on that, do you think that impacts, say you're hiring juniors now, do you think that completely changes the skill set you look for? That now it needs to be people that have some skills or are able to work with those AI tools?
No, that may change, but at the moment, my expectation of junior engineers is your job is to hone your craft, right? I'd be horrified to be in a situation, and this can happen, by the way, probably sooner than I would like to see, but I would be horrified to have a junior engineer who's still learning the craft, forcing them to use AI tools, and they generate a whole bunch of stuff, but actually don't understand what they're generating, how it works, how to debug it, how it all fits together. I think there is a lot of value of, for instance, using AI tools to better understand complexity of systems and, again, accelerate learning, for instance, right? And be that co-pilot that gives you nudges and suggestions. But ultimately, it is down to people like myself to make sure that we keep creating that next generation of future senior engineers in the industry. But I can see that's hard with both, an economic climate at the moment where there isn't a whole lot of demand for juniors in our industry, and then you have AI tools where there are now a lot of senior business leaders, technology leaders, making statements like, it will just replace all of those people. Not saying that won't happen at some point in the future, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And that's why we need to keep on investing in nurturing and growing junior engineers in our industry.
Yeah, and it's not technically engineers, but I know Klarna replaced their entire customer service team with
Yeah.
AI agents, and then it didn't go so well, and they rehired a load of customer service agents. So
Yeah.
to think that we can replace probably any entire department with AI at the
Yeah.
moment's a bit short-sighted, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, we have a sizable client services team, because one of the big frustrations from people working as a client working with a often a kind of a fintech or a neobank is, I can't speak to anyone, right? Now, one of the big value propositions of Flagstone is you can actually pick up a phone, and in many cases within 20 seconds you can speak to a human being, talk to your problem, solved, done. And that's why we have quite high customer satisfaction scores. And so for us, the value proposition to our staff is, we've made a significant investment in hiring people because we are so confident in this business and the growth of the business, that we are willing to make an upfront investment in putting the foundations in place. Now, that does mean over the next couple of years, we want to scale the business without hiring more people all the time, so that we can find it and see the return and grow profits, etc. In order to do that, we need to become more efficient and more productive. And AI is one, it's not the only, is one of the tools where we want to equip people to maybe remove some of the mundane parts of their job. Having to respond to the same question 50 times a day, nobody gets kind of fulfillment out of that. So those are the type of things that we're now actively working on and trying to replace with automation, but it doesn't necessarily need to be AI. Like it could very well be we need to improve some of the wording on our app, so that clients aren't confused. So it's not just AI, but that is really kind of how I look at it, is how can we make a high performing, productive organization more productive.
Okay, nice. And moving on to your role, you mentioned it
Yeah.
there about how important it is for the next generation. What do you think the toughest part of your role and the role of a CTO is?
I think it applies to anyone in a kind of a senior leadership role, especially on C-level, is it can be quite lonely. And over the past couple of years, one of the big things I've learned is I didn't invent this, by the way, is the concept of your first team. And in the past, my assumption was that my first team was my senior tech leadership team. And over the past couple of years, I've come to the realization that that's not true. My first team is my peers on the exec team. So CFO, Chief Products Officer, those peers are my first team, and those are the people who will help you when you need the help, and things go wrong, when you need to unblock something, and those are the people where you can go have a drink and have confidential conversations with. And I love my own direct senior tech team, but ultimately, you can't ignore the fact that you are their line manager. You can't ignore the fact that you are responsible for their success in the business, because you make decisions around promotion, salary, end year reviews. And so that can make it quite lonely. And I think especially when I was working on that 16-month replatforming, essentially rebuilding the business almost, especially from a tech and commercial point of view. Like, that's when I realized you need those people around you to not feel lonely. And I think it's quite common for people who kind of go into that exec level, top level in a business, to maybe neglect that a bit. And so that will be one of the big things I would recommend everyone, is make sure that you build stronger relationships with your peer group.
Yeah, because I guess there's that expectation as well that you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So going through a 16-month re-platforming exercise, I'm sure there's moments where you felt really frustrated and things weren't going as you wanted them to, and it's hard necessarily to have the people that you can talk to about that and support you.
Yeah, I also want to clarify that I quite often I don't know what I'm doing.
It's good to hear.
It essentially what you learn over time is that you're dealing with certain problems or questions that you haven't answered before. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody else has that, right? There are very few unique problems I deal with. But what you do build up over time is the confidence that, you know what, I've actually solved similar problems like this before. So it's like almost heuristics where there are only so many different types of problems to solve. And the longer you do your job, go to different companies, the more you also build up that library of kind of almost pattern matching with problems, solutions. And then the more you do it and the more you see actually that worked, the more you then build the confidence of, yeah, okay, I haven't seen this exact problem before, but I've solved so many similar problems. This is how we're going to solve it. This is how we move forward. So yeah, I want to clarify. I don't always know what I'm doing, but
Are you honest with your team about that?
yeah, I am.
Good.
I'm quite honest with that. In actual fact, when I ran my own business, there is that dog meme photo of this
With the flag.
no, there's like this Labrador sitting at a desk behind a computer, and then there's this text saying, "I have no idea what I'm doing," right? And the office dog, and so I printed that out, a big poster, hung it on the wall. Because what we were doing is we were building a medical hardware business where we were trying to revolutionize the way we use industrial 3D printing to build like a kind of automated supply chain for creating medical kind of supporting devices for children with disabilities. There's a lot of kind of novel invention and problem solving, and to normalize the fact that none of us really know what we're doing. That's why I put that poster on it. So I've always been very clear to people I work with on my teams, like it's most likely because none of us are doing the exact same job every single day for multiple companies. We're always facing new problems that we may or may not have solved before. So it's fine. But yeah, it takes time to build that confidence.
Yeah. But I think it's good to have that honesty with people because otherwise there's a pressure that everybody feels like they should know exactly what they're doing all the
Yeah.
time. Within whether it's fintech or FS within the UK,
Mm.
what do you think there's one thing we could change to improve how products operate for consumers, whether it's savings or just
Yeah.
generally?
I mean, one of the biggest challenges that we have at Flagstone is it's not easy for people to move money around in this country. Now, there's like if you've, let's say, sold your house and want to transfer that money to Flagstone, it's not straightforward. You can't just go online in your bank and say transfer 500k to Flagstone, because that will trigger all kind of AML controls. Your bank will like, oh wait a minute, are you sure? Do you know what you're doing? So transferring large amounts of money, even for very legitimate reasons, is not easy. And I think there is sometimes a deliberate friction built in to protect people. But that does mean that it's not always easy to feel in control over your own money. So I think there is probably work that can be done to make money transfers easier. I know there are some initiatives already, industry initiatives around moving, make it easier, for instance, to transfer things like pensions from one provider to another one, or ISAs and things like that. But I think there's probably some more that can be done around moving money, cash, of course, balancing then fraud and things like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And then I guess a few quick fire questions for you just to round
Yeah.
off. What's one leadership belief that you've changed your mind on recently?
Not recently, but something learned over the years is that I was very much of the belief that you can only be a good leader that is respected if you roll up your sleeves and you lead from the front in the trenches with the team. Now, that doesn't scale very well, and it's also very stressful. And the larger your team becomes, the more of those type of rolling up your sleeve moments there are. And in actual fact, most of the times the teams don't want you in the trenches. They really want you to remove friction and blockers and deal with executive stakeholder management and things like that. So I think that's something I had to learn the hard way over the years, is that you need to be involved and you need to be supportive, but ultimately your job is to make sure that you hire great people and create the best environment for them to do their job, not you rolling up your sleeve and doing their job.
Was that after people saying, please, Lee, just stop getting involved?
I think the downside of course of seniority is that a lot of people don't tell you that in your face, right? I think it slowly started to dawn on me that that's not a good strategy. When you start getting a bit burned out, it's like, it's stressful
Yeah.
doing that all the time. And so, I realized there's probably better ways of leading and leadership than trying to be part of the team all the time.
And then what are you proudest of throughout your career?
Well, there are probably a couple of things, but the most recent one is achieving the replatforming of Flagstone, because it wasn't just a tech rebuild. It was really like, businesses that have been around for over 10 years have accumulated a lot of historic decision making that make running the business more complex, like bespoke terms and conditions of partners, processes that were introduced to win a particular deal, particular partner or a client. And if you add 10 years of those type of decisions during the hustle phase of building a business, then all of a sudden you realize, why do we have all these complex type of edge cases in our system? So part of that was also just renegotiating contracts, simplifying the business, the way we run the business, and then at the same time build a whole new platform with a whole bunch of new capabilities, and at the same time keeping the business running during a period of unprecedented growth, moving 12 billion from one platform to the other platform. And so you hear a lot of horror stories of failures of replatforming. And the one thing I got wrong was I was convinced that we would deliver this in 9 months, and turns out it was 16 months because it was very complex. But yeah, the fact that I actually managed to do that with my team is something I'm quite proud of.
Probably a bit of a disservice to call it replatforming, isn't it?
Yeah, I see. Maybe I need to think of a better,
you need a new phrase for it.
and kind of a new label for it. Yeah, it was a lot more than just a technical replatforming exercise.
And then finally, what is one book or resource you recommend to aspiring leaders?
Try not to read too many business books, more because there's only so much time, and trying to relax and do something else, which is also what my wife forces me to do. But if there's one book that we do recommend to everyone at Flagstone, is the I think it's called No Rules Rules.
Netflix one.
The Netflix one. There are a couple of key principles that we value at Flagstone around things like disagree and commit. There's the other book around the 5 dysfunctions of teams, where you often have people trying to have difficult conversations with each other, but they've never invested in building the trust, which means that difficult conversations become some very toxic sometimes conversations. So those 2 books is what I usually recommend. But most of the time, I'd say finding good peers in the industry, other CTOs, other engineering directors, other senior engineers. There are good events. We're spoiled in the UK and especially London with some really good events, especially for fintech as well. So that's usually where I get most of my inspiration, good ideas, and energy. But yeah, those 2 books, the Netflix book and the 5 Dysfunctions, I think is like mandatory reading for everyone at Flagstone.
I like the event and group suggestion as well, because it's quite nice to actually have that FaceTime and learn
Yeah.
with people, not just learn from a book or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because then that person can probably summarize the book in a couple of minutes for you with some extra insights rather than you spending 2 evenings or 3 evenings having to go read that book.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Lee. I've really enjoyed chatting today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Really good.